this is Kyle, also known as AlienTude, reviewing today 3 different swords from Swordier. These were all review samples sent to me, and each one of them has kind of its own story and interesting things to talk about. Up first, the first one we're going to talk about is this top one, which is the SWM 1029, which sells new for $279. Next up, we have this one in the middle with the wire wrap. This is SWMZ-1001 and costs $329. And at the bottom is this one with the rain flap, which is SWMZ-1004, and it retails for $289. All of these have scabbards that come with them. They're all available on Swordier's website. I will link it in the description. In addition, the Sword Buyer's Guide store has been partnering with Swordier recently, and some of them might be available there as well. Those prices are subject to change. Tariffs are a thing. I don't know what the prices are going to be. The de minimis exception is ending pretty much right around the time this video is releasing, so I can't say what the price is going to be, what tariffs are going to cost, anything like that. All I can really do is go off what the price is on the website. So let's start by taking a look at the first sword, which is the SWM 1029, which, like I said, sells for $279. That is this model, this sword right here. And this is actually the second one of this sword that Swordier sent me. And this is the first one they sent me. Why did they send me 2 of these? Well, this one has a pretty noticeable bend in it. It's not like immediately noticeable. I had to hold it up and really look at it, and I was like, wait a minute, that looks a bit wrong. And then I put it on a flat surface. You can see that picture here, and the bend is pretty noticeable. Well, when I let Swordier know about that, they apologized, said they'd send me another one. That's this one. This one also has a bend in it, although it's not as bad. It's much less noticeable. It's not as fatally flawed as this one, but it is still noticeable and it is still a problem. But let's start talking about the different features on this sword. We've got a scent stopper pommel with a nice finish on it. All the corners are chamfered over. It works very, very well. The peen on the second one is interesting. It looks like it's been split into 4 pieces and then peened down and had epoxy filled in the gap. That's not the case on the first one they sent me. I asked what the thought process there was. I didn't actually get a response to that. But both of them seem like the pommel is on very securely, so I don't think this is a problem. I'm not a swordsmith. I don't really know why you would divide the peen like that. The grip is my favorite part of this sword and also has one of my least favorite parts of the sword. The shaping is outstanding. It's got this really beautiful hexagonal shape that really locks into the hand and keeps that sword really nicely gripped. I can get a really solid grip on the sword and not worry about it twisting in my hand. The flat surface right here really helps with edge alignment. It's very easy to index the blade if it wasn't for those bends in them. The problem is this metal ring here. This is the one I cut with, and it is loose. It came loose almost right away when cutting, and that degrades that feel of security in my hand, because if my hand bumps against that ring, I feel it move and it makes me feel like I don't have as good of a grip on the sword as I want. In addition, I'm concerned it's just going to start moving around quite a bit. There's a simple cord on the wood core here, and it's functional. It looks fine. It kind of reminds me of a Chinese jian more than a European style longsword. And that's going to be something I'm going to address throughout this review, because aside from these being in this order for a couple reasons, one of those reasons is the release date. This is the oldest of the 3 models. The middle one's the middle, and this is their newest one. And I want to explore how Swordier has evolved in a short period of time, like 6 months between the release of these, I think, something like that. Not very much time, and they've evolved quite a bit. This, like I said, is a little bit something you'll see on a lot of budget Chinese longswords, or probably arming swords as well, where they will do hilt construction and hilts a lot like they are jian or dao, rather than long swords or arming swords or European swords. And this is definitely more on that line. That said, it still works fine. It gives me a good grip, other than the ring. The cross guard is an S-shaped guard, but it's a kind of a funky one. First off, this is a left-handed one. The twist or the curve to it goes over the hand in a way that it would work if it was a left-handed user, not a righty. Not a big deal, just something I noticed. It is fine. It's chamfered over well, all that kind of thing. The design is fine. The S could be a little bit more pronounced. It looks just a little bit modern to me. It doesn't really have the graceful curves of a S guard that European longswords tended to have when they had that shape, but it's fine. I don't mind it too much. The blade is pattern welded steel, and it's a very vibrant pattern. You can really see the pattern in it. They definitely did some acid etching to bring that out. It is pretty much a 16A style sword with a relatively short fuller, a diamond cross section after the fuller, and then it goes into a mostly acute point. It doesn't quite have a 16A profile to my mind, though. This should have a little bit more taper right in this area, the way I view a Type 16A, and it should be a bit more acute of a point, really have a point that could be used for armor, anti-armor, jamming in between the links of mail, a really more acute point that you would typically see on the later medieval longswords. The finish on here is a very nice and even satin. There's some rippling on the surfaces, but they're not deep or problematic in any way. And overall, it's a nice looking blade. I'm a little concerned, though, that there's two of these with the pattern welding that have a bend in it. That makes me think that the bend might be caused by the two different steels having different needing different types of heat treatment, and therefore causing a bend. This is my completely amateur thought on it, though. I am by no means a metallurgist, a heat treatment specialist, a swordsmith, anything like that. Just my random thoughts on it. Now, Swordier did say that once I pointed out that both of these had a bend, that they were not going to sell this model anymore. Well, that seems like they decided they are going to, because it is still available on their website. So let's talk about the sharpness and how this sword cuts. So I'm going to use the bent one, the first one, to do the edge test on paper, just because I don't want to have to get it off the stand again. Very clean, very sharp sword. But this is going to be a consistent thing with Swordier. All of the swords they've sent me for this review are very, very sharp and very effective at cutting paper. Now, how did this one handle backyard targets? Not very well, frankly. And the reason for that is that bend in the blade. It was definitely affecting my edge alignment. And then when you're swinging and the sword's curved, it doesn't impact straight on. And that causes me to start bashing the bottles around more. It moves around well. It can deliver cuts well when I get it just right. But because that bend is there, it does cause some issues. That's not to say it's terrible. It can still go through targets pretty decently, but it could be a better cutter. And I think it probably would be a better cutter if it were straighter. So all of these swords did come with scabbards. This is the one that came with the first model of the SWM 1029, and they're fine. This scabbard is probably the least refined of the ones that they sent. We'll get into the other ones more, but it's actually very, very similar to the scabbard of another Swordier sword I reviewed, which I will put a link to in the description and probably up here on the screen somewhere. It's fine. It's got, the most interesting thing to me about it is it's lined, at least at the throat, with a little bit of what looks like ray skin to help refine the fit, which seems like a good call. It works well. It has a pretty decent draw and fit. I'm not going to talk about handling too much because this video is already going to be very long, and if I got into the nuances of handling of each of them, nobody's going to watch that whole video. I do want to show the balance point. This one is balanced quite close to the guard. That looks like about 1 inch to 1.5 inches. And if we look at the vibration nodes, you can see this one is center of percussion's back a ways. Maybe a little bit further back than I would like, but not terribly so. And the grip center of percussion, it's a little bit lower than I would like. I would like it, it's about here. I would like it up more like here. Just my preference. Flexibility. This sword is pretty flexible. It's a relatively thin blade compared to some of the other ones, so it's unsurprising that it's fairly flexible. One other quick note on this model before I move on. I had said that this one, the ring on the grip had come loose during cutting. Well, this one I have not cut with, and the ring is slightly loose as well. So these don't seem to be secured to the grip very well at all. During this section, I repeatedly referred to this sword as the SWMZ 1004. I apologize for the confusion. This is actually the SWMZ 1001. These model numbers are a little hard to keep track of. And now moving on to the second sword, the SWMZ 1004, which is, again, retails for $329. So this is one, after I had received the 2 of these and had a bend in both of them, I had some discussions with Alex from Swordier, and we discussed what if instead of just doing a review of these and having some negative things to say, frankly, because the bend is not a good thing, what if we had him send me a couple others and we could showcase the evolution of Swordier's products? And that's why I brought up both these models. This was the kind of an intermediary model, if you will. It was released certainly after this, but before the SWMZ 1004. And I chose this one because I had several people ask me about it, as I had with this one as well. But this one has a very iconic look to it with the wire wrap on it. That's not something you see very often from Chinese makers. So it immediately caught my eye. So if you just put this up next to the other SWM 1029, the blades look pretty similar. The fuller on the one I'm holding is considerably longer, but the overall profile is pretty similar. This has a little bit more gentle of a curve into the tip, which to me looks more accurate to a medieval style longsword. So I really appreciate that change. So let's go over the different components here. We have a fishtail pommel that is executed really, really nicely. It's got very crisp lines, but everything's chamfered nicely. There's no hot spots. Even though these corners here are pretty crisp, and theoretically they would bite your hand if you tried to grip it right there, there's really no reason to grip it there. The swell of the pommel is perfectly designed to have your offhand slide down and stop there. You can grip there, that kind of thing, but you're not going to grip the actual bottom of the pommel. So those corners are not going to be a problem. When I was cutting with the sword, if I slid my hand all the way down there, there was no hot spots at all. The wire wrap is kind of got an odd look to it. I'm not sure what material that is. I don't know if it's steel. If it's steel, it's got a really odd finish to it because it doesn't really look like steel to me. It looks more like zinc or aluminum or something like that. It doesn't look like steel. That could just be the finish on it though. It has a very nice shape overall, also a hexagonal shape, although it's a little bit more curved and a little bit more I want to say blunted. You don't feel the shape quite as much because the leather wrap kind of dulls the shape, if you will. It kind of smooths over the corners a little bit. Not that the corners are sharp or anything, but it just makes it a little bit more, the transitions from flat to flat, a little bit more gentle. The leather is very shiny and slick. It doesn't feel like real leather. It might be, it doesn't feel like it. It doesn't look like it to me either. And it's one of my bigger complaints about this sword because it doesn't give me that good grip. The shape of the grip is great. It gives me a very good feel on there. But the leather is just a little bit slick in my hand, and it could use to be a little bit grippier. The wire wrap is a little rough on the hands also. And I was surprised at this because I have other swords that have a wire wrap, and I've never had any kind of issues with it being a little bit rough. It's not bad, but a few cuts in there, I did notice the wire kind of rubbed my hands a little bit wrong. This is a pretty minor complaint, all things being said. There is some stitching along one side of the grip, and this is very prominent stitching. You can absolutely feel it in the hands, but it's not rough in the slightest, which is a big relief. I can compare this to another company that does stitching oftentimes on their leather wraps, and that's Windlass. And Windlass is, in my opinion at least, something that I've noticed, a lot of their stitching on grips is rough. It creates hot spots. And that's not the case here. I don't have any issues with the stitching being sharp enough or rough enough to bother my hands. It does help if you want to use one edge as a true edge. The stitching is very prominent in the hand, so you know exactly which edge you're using. The crossguard is a pretty simple one. It is a type that I have called very traditional medieval style. And I've been called out on that because it's actually not. And there was a commenter a while ago who said that is much more of a later than medieval style guard that they would oftentimes associate with medieval swords. And I was like, no way, that can't be right? So I went through pretty much all the museum collections I have bookmarked, all the books I have of historical swords, and I found one sword that looked like it had this style of crossguard. I couldn't find any others that had much of anything like that. So I was wrong. As far as I know, that's not really that traditional. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. I found one that looked like that, but I couldn't find much else. There was one other that was kind of similar, but there was really only one that was like, that type of crossguard. So I guess it's not particularly common like I thought it was. That said, for reproductions, it's a very traditional style. It's something that you see on a whole lot of swords. And it's one that looks, to my eye, it really looks good on swords. So I can slightly excuse myself for thinking it was more traditional. In addition, it does have a typology in Oakshot's crossguard typology, although his sketches of it are atrocious. So seeing details in that sketch is just not good. Anyways, moving on to the blade here. I already talked a little bit about the profile, the fuller. I'm going to repeat myself. There's a little bit of rippling in the surfaces of the blade, nothing egregious. The overall shape is a little bit more medieval inspired to me. It's a little closer to the Type 16A that what I would think of as a Type 16A, and that is what Swordier markets it as, is a 16A. It shows evolution already. If we look at the first one to the next one, the blade, the subtle details are getting there. They're not there all the way. The fuller is too long for a 16A, in my opinion. That's more of a 12A length fuller, maybe a 13A. It's a little bit long for a fuller, but it doesn't look wrong. And there's a sense of aesthetic, a sense of like, that looks right for a medieval sword. And this one, I think, captures that. Whereas the first one, the 1029, I think had a little bit, just didn't quite get that for me personally. Overall, the entire look of this one really does capture the look of a reproduction medieval longsword, if you get what I'm saying there. It looks more authentic than the first one I talked about. So let's do the edge test. Just like the first one, very, very sharp edge, very nicely sharpened. I didn't mention this on the previous one, but it's true for all three of these. The primary bevel is from the center of the sword right to the edge. There's no secondary bevel. It's just very cleanly executed. Let's look at the point of balance. It's a few inches out. That's like, 2.5 to 3.5, somewhere around there. I'm not very good at eyeballing that. You can see just from looking at the point of percussions, this is a stiffer blade. And the point of percussion is kind of hard to make out, but hopefully you can see it there. The point in the grip, it's again a little bit lower than I would like. It's again like right around there. I prefer it up a little bit more in the grip. And flexibility wise, you can see this is a much more rigid sword. So how does it cut? Surprisingly not very well. I was cutting with this sword and I was really struggling to get very much of any good cuts. I got a few here and there, but most of the time I was bashing bottles a lot. I was getting through them, but it was tearing its way through, not giving those clean cuts. And I was really, really confused by this because this is a sharp sword and it should be cutting cleanly. What I did after this cutting session, I went through and looked at all my cuts in slow motion and I noticed something. The sweet spot on this sword is small. That center of percussion is where you want to cut with this, but it doesn't have almost any leeway on either side of it. If I'm not cutting right on that sweet spot, it does not like to cut at all. If I cut right, if my targeting is precise and I cut using that sweet spot, it can deliver very good cuts. But even if I'm like an inch off on the blade, maybe even half an inch on the blade, it starts tearing through targets rather than cutting, which makes it a not particularly fun sword to cut with because being that precise, pretty much, unless you've practiced with this sword a whole lot, you're not going to be that precise with your targeting on the blade. You need to do a lot of practice to really learn the sword, to know the exact measure you need to be in. If you're just doing this as let me take out, that sword to cut with, you're probably not going to have that degree of comfort with finding the sweet spot that this sword really demands. That being said, if this is your only sword or one of your only 2, 3 swords, anything like that, nothing wrong with that, of course. And you practice with this a lot, it can definitely reward you with very good cuts. It's just, for me, I didn't enjoy cutting with it because I really struggled to get those clean cuts. So one other thing to talk about with this sword, and that's the scabbard. It has a leather wrap, and I say leather, it's very clearly the same material as the grip, same exact look, same exact slick feel, and I don't think that's real leather. It has a very nice fit. There's pretty much no rattle. It's a little chunky, but not crazy so. And overall, it looks good. The fit is good. However, this is something that happened to me as I was getting set up for this review. I pulled this sword out of the scabbard. And I was like, why does it look so, there's so much oil on this sword. I did not put that much oil on the sword. And what's that smell? This sword was covered with a sticky substance that I can only assume is some glue that leaked into the scabbard and onto the blade. I don't know exactly what happened. I have not seen this before. The sword's been in the scabbard for about a month since I last oiled it, and it was just absolutely covered in a really sticky feeling substance that looked like just pooled oil, but it was, I think, glue. I had to bathe the sword in alcohol to get it clean, and I did manage to get it clean, but I'm a little concerned. I just put it back in the scabbard. I don't see any of that on it right now, but there might be some on here. The thing is, the scabbard also has that same smell to it, so I am pretty confident that what happened is that here's my speculation. I think the glue they used to secure the leather to the grip or to the scabbard core leaked through the wood onto the blade. It's really the only thing I can think of. I am not going to be storing the sword in the scabbard anymore because I don't want that glue back on it. It was a pain to clean off, and I don't know how that would affect I don't know if that would protect the sword from rusting in the future. So I'm not going to store it in the scabbard, whereas normally if I have a wood core scabbard, I store the sword in it. That's hard to say. And now moving on to the last sword I am reviewing in this video. That is this SWMZ 1004. This one sells new for $289. Now, Swordier has it listed as an 18C. It's kind of a misnomer. It's much more of a 15A, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment because there's definitely something to talk about there. It also comes with a scabbard. We'll get to that in a moment, but it's got these really floppy rain flaps, rain shape, whatever you want to call it. It's got a beautiful scent stopper pommel that is chamfered beautifully. The finish is gorgeously satin on it. I really like this pommel. The grip is a 1.5 hand length, just enough room up here to get your primary hand on, and then there's plenty of room for your offhand, either on the grip or you can slide it down onto the pommel as well. At least my hands, that fits my hands well. The crossguard is very similar to the one on the previous model, the SWM Z1001, and you can see they're pretty similar. There's a few differences in the details, especially in the quillen tips, but they are very similar. And I already talked about the historical nature of those, so I'm not going to go into that more. The rain shape here is thin and it is floppy, but it doesn't quite do the job I want it to. I'll talk about that more once I get it up in my hand. The leather on the grip here is the best feeling leather of anything from Swordier I've handled and touched. It actually feels like real leather, and it has a really good shape and feel in the hand. There's a stitching. This time, instead of putting the stitching on the flat, they put it on the back of the grip. And I'm saying back as if there's a front or back. There really isn't. But for the sake of description, it's the back of the grip. And just like the stitching on the other one, it is prominent, but has absolutely no hot spots at all. So it is an effective tool for helping you determine which edge you have in the hand and which edge you're using as the true edge, and at the same time does not detract from the grip at all. But let's talk about the elephant in the room here. This is the Swordier, and this is the Albion Mercenary. Swordier, Albion. These two swords are extremely similar to the point where it is pretty much blatantly obvious that the Swordier is a copy of the Albion Mercenary. I don't think you could even call this inspired by. This is a straight up copy. Is that a problem for you? I can't answer that. I think it's a little tacky to copy somebody else's design when this is not an actual historical sword. This is not a sword that was recreated from a historical example. This was an amalgamation of parts that Peter Johnson designed and put together to make the Mercenary. And Swordier took the time and effort of Peter's design and kind of confiscated it for their own purposes. You can see where my stance is on there. I don't think that's very cool. There's a lot of room for disagreement there. There's a lot of people who think you can't copyright sword design. I do not want to get into that already. If you want more on that subject, take a look at my review of the Balor Arms Kriegsmesser. Again, I'll link that in the description up on screen where I talk about that some more. I do want to point out a few differences here though. First off, the crossguard is slightly different. Swordier has put in that central ridge right there, whereas the Mercenary does not have it. In addition, the profile taper is a little bit different, especially out towards the tip. Hope you're able to get that on screen. The Albion is also a reinforced tip, and the Swordier is not reinforced. It gets quite thin out there. So these are very, very similar swords, and it's up to you to decide if that's bothersome to you or not. So that similarity to the mercenary is why I said this is not really an 18C, it's much more of a 15A. It's because it's copying a sword that is sold as a 15A. In addition, the profile here isn't really 18C like. It's got too much profile taper out this way. It gets too narrow, not wide enough for 18C out towards the tip. But it's a beautiful blade. It has, again, the exact same features as the other ones, a little bit of rippling on the surface, a very even and nicely done satin finish, a primary bevel that is from the center of the sword all the way to the edge, very cleanly done, just very well executed, especially at the price point. Now for this type, I do think the lack of reinforced tip is a flaw. This tip gets very thin out here and there's just no meat there. So it's not going to be a good anti-armor weapon, which this type of sword, generally speaking, this type of sword was a pretty multi-purpose sword, but it absolutely had a point that was designed to help with piercing into mail, piercing between the links, maybe busting the links open. And with how thin and narrow the tip is on this one, I don't think it's going to have the durability that you would want to have for that. Let's test the edge. Just like the other two, very, very sharp. And since we're talking about the Albion Mercenary and how it compares, it's sharper than any Albion I've gotten out. I will say that Albion recently has done considerably better sharpening that I've seen. I've seen progress on their sharpening and it's gotten better recently, but this is definitely a notch above what that is. So cutting with this sword, I can finally say it cuts beautifully. I've wanted to say that the swords Swordier sent me cut really well, but most of them, frankly, haven't. And this one cuts beautifully, at least in the backyard. Cutting water bottles, paper targets, things like that, this sword sings through them and gives me those really satisfying clean cuts where you can sometimes get multiple cuts on a single small water bottle. It cuts backyard targets beautifully. I loved cutting with this sword. I enjoyed cutting with this sword a lot more than I enjoyed cutting with the mercenary back when I cut with that, which I haven't for a long time, because it's so much sharper. The mercenary I have was secondhand. It doesn't have a very good edge on it. It needs to be sharpened up. But this sword cuts beautifully. I really enjoyed cutting with it. Looking at the point of balance, looks like that's about 3 inches, right around there. It's a very stiff blade, so there's not, the center of percussion is kind of hard to see in the blade. The spot in the grip is right where I want it. There's a reason this is my favorite of the swords Swordier sent me. There's a lot to like about it. And the flexibility, like I said, it's a much stiffer blade. So this sword feels a lot like the mercenary. Again, I don't want to get too much into handling just because this video is already so long, but it has a lot of the moves around very similarly to the mercenary. I can get both hands on there. The grip is basically almost identical to the mercenary, except that this is a little bit more slender here. And I do notice that in the grip. It's definitely a little bit more slender than the Albion, but it moves beautifully. It is very usable one-handed. It comes alive in two. It has good sword wind. This is the sword to get from Swordier, in my opinion. Of these three, I really like this sword. And it also came with a scabbard. This one does have the ray skin on the inside. This one did not have any on it. The fit is very good, just like all of them actually have had really good fit. The leather on here feels much nicer than the leather on the previous one. It doesn't feel exactly the same as the grip. but it's a very nice feel. It's got an interesting look. It's not a color you see very often in scabbards, at least modern ones. So overall, this scabbard is quite nice. It's a little bit chunky. It's a little bit thicker than it needs to be, but it's not really a big problem. There's just something about it I like. It has a good look and feel to it. And when I pick it up in the scabbard, I'm like, oh yeah, I like this sword. Then I pull the sword out, it's like, oh yeah, I really like this sword. One thing I did say I was going to talk about is the rain flaps. So one of my idea behind what these are for is to protect the blade when you're thumbing it. When you're doing a lot of German false edge cuts, you thumb the blade for a lot of the cuts. And my thinking is you would use the leather would be what you rest your thumb on to protect the blade from it so you don't get your finger oils and stuff on the blade. But these are not long enough for me to actually thumb the blade. Like I want to do it like that. And if I just thumb just this part, I have to move my grip down and then it doesn't support the blade the way I want it to support it. So I still have to thumb the actual blade itself. So that to me is the primary purpose of these. I have no idea if that's what they were there historically for, but it's what I see them, what the purpose of them that I see is. And they fail at that on this sword. It's not a big deal. I've seen some people who have bought this sword who've taken this off. I assume they just cut it and then leave a little bit right here in between the grip and the crossguard. It certainly is something that could be done. All right, that's 3 different swords from Swordier in the $280 to $330 price range. Are they worth it? Each one has to have its own answer because there's quite a bit of variability here. I think this one, the SWM 1029 at $279, is probably not worth it. I don't think the pattern welded steel, I don't know if it's the pattern welded steel or something else, but 2 swords, 2 bent swords, that's kind of problematic. In addition, the ring being a little bit loose, a little bit concerning to me. It's just, I think Swordier has done better as they've progressed. Moving on to the SWM Z1001, this one with the wire wrap and the ring or the fishtail pommel, much improved from the previous sword. It has so much more of an authentic look to it. The grip is much more, it has the right aesthetic to it. Personally, I think this leather could use to be improved. It's too slick for my taste, but it's a competent sword at the price, that's for sure. It is the most expensive of the bunch at $329, but I think it is mostly worth that price. I think if it's going to be your only sword or one of your only swords, unless it really calls to you with this specific look, I would probably try this one. But it is a perfectly competent sword. My only real big concern is the scabbard. And I don't know why that glue seemed to seep out onto the blade, but it did. It happened, and I can't ignore that. I'm hoping it doesn't happen on other Swordier swords, but at this point it hasn't, so maybe it was just one bad one, I don't know. But it is something to be concerned about. Lastly, there is this one, the SWMZ 1004, easily the best of the bunch, $289, absolute steal. This is the one to get if you want one of these. If you don't mind the blatant copying of the Albion Mercenary. Again, I can't judge that for you. To me, it does leave a bad taste in my mouth, but man, there's a reason the Albion Mercenary is one of my favorite swords. There's a reason I consider it kind of like the iconic hand-and-a-half sword, the iconic bastard sword. It is just, the aesthetics of it are beautiful. The handling is outstanding. I love the Albion Mercenary. So it should be no surprise that I really love this sword too. Even though there are some changes here and there, it is very much intended to evoke Albion mercenary vibes. And whether or not that's a problem, that's up for you to decide. It is absolutely worth the price if that doesn't bother you. If it does bother you, I mean, it's a great sword at a great price. But I can understand why you wouldn't want to buy it if it bothers you that they pretty much copied Peter Johnson's design. But one more thing I want to talk about, and I've touched on this throughout the video, is the evolution of Swordier as a company making European swords. And I guess I gotta say longswords in particular, because I only have received longswords from them, which, not complaining, I certainly love longswords more than I do arming swords. I like arming swords, I love longswords. So if we can just look at them in chronological order here, the differences and the improvements are amazing for how short of a time frame we're talking about. This is less than a year of development. They went from this one with the pattern welded steel, bend in the blade, cord wrap, kind of anachronistic ring and crossguard, to this one which has much more, captures the look of a longsword and the handling a bit more as well. And then, of course, this one is the peak, but we know why. So Swordier has done a lot of improvement, and they are open to feedback. I have provided them feedback on these. I've seen other people provide feedback. They are very open and willing to adjust, improve, and make things better. And that's a great thing to see out of a sword company. Now, unfortunately, all the prices I've talked about are up in the air. Tariffs are going to do, who knows what tariffs are going to do. Right now, these could be double the price. I don't know. The tariff situation is complicated as hell, and I don't want to get into the politics of it, but it absolutely is going to have a massive effect on the Chinese sword scene, on getting swords from Chinese makers. It's going to, frankly, as far as I can tell, completely wreck the ability to get them at affordable prices. And I don't know if there's any end in sight to that. So the prices on here, it's what they are at time of recording. It's what they are listed at Swordier's website. But I don't think that's what you would pay if you ordered it now. And that's going to wrap up this extra stuffed review. I want to give a huge thank you to Alex for sending me all these swords. I really appreciate it, Alex. And Swordier, even though there are some problems with some of these, they absolutely deserve your attention. They are pricing their swords very aggressively. And if you can get one at the price they list, it's definitely something worth your attention. Until next time, Alien 2 out.